Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar, Building a Resilient Cybersecurity Strategy for Enterprises. I would like to introduce our speakers, Rangan Venkataraman, CEO of Pinochle, and Pinnocle's Vice President of Business Development, Anil Rao. Without further ado, it's my pleasure to open the floor to our speakers.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on the topic of paramount importance to organizational resilience, risk assessment and business impact of disaster recovery. What we'd like to delve are the critical strategies and methodologies that empower businesses to effectively navigate the intricate landscape of potential disruptions in an environment. From a cybersecurity perspective, there is many areas that we can cover. But today we decided that we'd probably delve into how can you be a resilient enterprise, an enterprise that can bounce back should you have a scenario. Many organizations are at a spectrum when it comes to the areas that they cover in cybersecurity. For example, you could cover areas like defensive securities, reactive, preventive, predictive, proactive, so on and so forth. However, even after you did everything humanly possible, every organization also needs to be ready for that, God forbid, situation where you have a breach or you have a disaster that you have to overcome. You still need to make sure that you have a process to get there. So in an age where technological advancements and global interconnectivity are at unprecedented levels, it is super important that we identify those risks that pose the greatest threat to the organization. What are the critical processes and assets that demand our utmost attention in the event of a disruption? How do we accurately gauge the potential impact of those scenarios, and what strategies would we want to use to implement it? That's really the focus of this webinar. So let's start with the first topic, which is risk assessment and business impact analysis. Risk assessment in this particular case involves identifying potential threats, vulnerabilities, and risks. It really starts with identifying your crucial and critical asset systems and processes that include your data, your applications, hardware, personnel, and facilities. The next part of it would be to identify the threats that you have to deal with. Those threats could be different for different companies. For certain companies, it might be things like hurricanes. In another company, it might be around floods. Those are extremely important aspects. Assessing vulnerabilities, which is evaluating the vulnerabilities that could be exploited. The impact of that, which could be financial loss, operational disruption, the likelihood, the risk prioritization is all part of it. The risk assessment involves looking at everything from a technology standpoint as well as a business standpoint, which is identifying your critical processes, the critical business processes that could be disrupted. With that said, I'll probably have Anil touch on two important aspects, which is what we call RTO and RPO. RTO stands for Recovery Time Objectives, and RPO stands for Recovery Point Objectives. Anil, over to you.
Yeah, so this is a very important aspect of DR, where the businesses, right, what this is basically this RPO and RTO is actually dictated by the business. So how much a business can sustain a loss? So how many hours of data I can lose is what is determined by the RPO. So this is where the businesses businesses dictate the terms. So they can say, I can say that I'll be able to lose maybe 1 hour of data maximum or not more than that. So all our backup and all our recovery has to be built in such a way that you should be able to recover all your data. The maximum data that you could use is 1 hour or less than 1 hour. So that's the RPO part. And RTO is again this is also dictated by the business, where they say that within this time, maybe within 1 hour or maybe maximum 2 hours, I should be able to have my system up and running in a different location. So again, our when our this thing is all our understand one thing is all or BCP DR, or other DR aspects are built based on the RTO and RTO. It's saying that, this much data business is ready to lose, and in this much time, only this much time they can be able to give you to come back to normal. So this is, this completely dictated by the business. So all your, today you look at it, all your disaster recovery runs with these two, RPO and RTO. The very important aspects in a disaster recovery.
The way we have broken down this presentation, is to really look at giving you some steps in terms of how to think of DR. DR is a fairly complex, topic. It involves business continuity planning as well as the technical angle of DR. What we want to do is help demystify that. And of course, this will be one of many webinars that we can, essentially cover. We can probably cover, this in maybe 15 to 16 different sessions because the topic is fairly broad and deep. We are basically looking at covering this at the 30,000 foot level for this particular purpose, just given the amount of time we have. So we are looking at, three phases for a DR. Phase 1 being foundational, phase 2 being the intermediate, and phase 3 being advanced. And every organization has to start from the structure that we have laid out. Moving on to business continuity planning. What is business continuity planning, in a nutshell? Business continuity planning is the ability to, someone has to move the next slide. Business continuity planning essentially is the ability to, ensure that we have a clear understanding of how to continue to operate the business in the event you have an issue. Case in point, there is, you have disasters like what happened in 9/11. Very many companies were not actually prepared to deal with a scenario like that. And today, if you look at companies, very many companies are planning for optimism. I'll basically lay out optimism and pessimism here. The reason why this is extremely important in business continuity planning is because you can have what I call definite optimism or indefinite optimism. So optimism essentially is we expect tomorrow to be better than today. Pessimism is that we expect tomorrow to be worse than today. But in either of these situations, irrespective of the ability to predict that tomorrow is going to be better or tomorrow is going to be worse, you have to have some plan around it. If you expect tomorrow to be better, are you hoping to win a lottery, or are you actually going to make plans to, to work around it? So, case in point, you can expect tomorrow to be better, but you still have to plan for ensuring that you have an infrastructure that allows you to continue to the next level. In disaster recovery planning, you're basically dealing with pessimism, which means that you're planning for a worst case scenario. And many people, at the end of the day, aren't even prepared for that. So that is definite pessimism. Definite pessimism is, tomorrow is going to be potentially worse, but you want to make sure that you are structured and ready for that scenario. Indefinite pessimism means you really do not have a plan, and you could have a scenario that's worse than today, and you really, can't do much. So the goal here with business continuity planning, whether you're pessimistic or you're optimistic, you want to be definitive about it. And you want to have a plan that allows your business to continue even in a scenario where you cannot. This is a competitive advantage for a company. Even if you are looking at competition and you're looking at parameters which may be roughly equal, where your environmental, the factors that you do not control, exist for you as well as your competitors, you want to make sure that you're differentiated by having business continuity planning, because that could mean all the difference. Case in point, even in 9/11, companies that continue to survive were companies that actually had a plan to continue even in the case of such a worse disaster. Now, many companies went out of business because they did not have such a plan. So today, business continuity planning and disaster recovery is not an option. It is something that every business has to find the time, the resources, and the capacity and the investment to make. And that is essentially what you refer to here as business continuity. Anil, you want to add anything to it?
Yeah. So business continuity planning, people think it's actually, it's you can say, like we call DRP, right? Disaster recovery plan is actually a subset of business continuity plan. So these two always, they go together. So if you look at business continuity plan, it's more related to the strategy, how the business, how the business is going to be, the entire business or the entire organization, how we are going to, how in case of disaster, how we are going to recover or how we are going to work. So that exactly, that's what it completely defines. This is what the business continuity plan defines. So, and coming back to the disaster recovery only touches upon the IT infrastructure, the complete IT infrastructure of the organization, where how you are going to recover to start. Okay, there we are talking about the entire organization, getting ready or being ready to work in the case of a disaster. Here, how am I going to get all the tools ready in case of a disaster? So that's the difference between the BCP and the DR.
With respect to DR, the other thing that we also have to understand is that the essence of the policy is to define the purpose and why it should be the linchpin in your business architecture. The ability to identify your critical assets, where you pinpoint the lifeblood of your organization. Because in all of this, keep in mind that this can be fairly overwhelming and daunting. And the idea is not to make sure that every aspect of the layers of your environment are covered. But even if you get to the lifeblood or the crown jewels of your organization, you can do a lot. Then, of course, defining your recovery objectives, where you uncover how long it takes for your RTO and RPO, which is really the time objectives as well as the point objectives. This allows you to make sure that you have the right resource mobilization and allocation. You also have an incident response framework that's very pivotal to having a well-defined protocol should there be an issue. Then the communication, grasping what kind of transparent and effective communication you need to have. What kind of testing and iteration, which is your fire drill? Are there any legal and regulatory considerations to actually be considering? All of that matters. Moving on to data backup and recovery. Anil, back to you.
Yeah. So this is you can say the core of the DR, disaster recovery. So how are you going to recover, right? So you need to have a proper backup and recovery strategy. So without this backup and recovery strategy, none of your DR would work, or none of your DR plans would work. So what you need to understand is, you need to understand what are the criticals, identify all the critical systems. If I don't have these critical systems up and running, what are the risks that it will lead to? Business risk, organizational risk, or it could be employee risk, whatever the risks are. You based on that. So what you do is, all your data backups are basically set up in such a way that you have you have on-site bail. So many people say that they put it on site. Some have client. So generally, it's always hybrid. So data backups are always hybrid. They have it locally. They also have it, outside. They have it on cloud, or they have it in different locations. So you should have a proper backup strategy. So, and also, I'm not just talking about backup strategy and retention of the backup. And again, if I'm just taking a backup and I'm not able to understand whether, if I restore them, whether it's going to work or not. So that also testing has to be done. So if you are having a backup, 1 month backup, at least, in 1 month, you should have had at least 2 or at least 3, recoveries to see that, yes, my data is being backed up properly and I'm able to recover the data, the backup. And these recover, when I recover these, I'm able to find all the data, and I basically, this is a recovery test is what that you need to do for the backup. Yeah. So this is a very crucial part of the of the data. You can say the disaster recovery policy itself. In the disaster recovery policy itself, it should define how I'm going to take up how the backups are going to be taken, where it's going to be stored, and how I'm going to restore it to test whether it's working or not.
To add to what Anil said, right, one of the areas that also get attacked during a potential breach is your backups. Bad actors have figured out over a period of time that, for them to be able to collect their ransom, which is, through a ransomware or a malware, they would also, enterprises have the ability, those that have an extremely robust backup and recovery process can actually use the backup to recover from it. And of course, backup and recovery is extremely crucial because you have real-time backups, you have incremental backups, you have full backups. Mostly companies do it as a checkbox routine exercise. But one has to think about backups in the form of the following. One is the close to real-time backups are the ones that will allow you to recover to the closest point in which a potential breach or a disaster happens. This allows you to make sure that you do not have a white space where that information is not actually available and you'll have to probably manually key it back in. That's one aspect. The other is, God forbid, you have a breach. How do you protect against the backup getting compromised? Which means that if the breach also includes the backup, then there is no get out of jail card. The get out of jail card here is essentially having things like an immutable backup and having a backup strategy which allows you to consider all the necessary scenarios so that your business continuity can happen. So backup, as such, many companies do have backups, but what we are basically saying is that those are backup solutions which can consider yesterday's problems, not necessarily addressing the problem of today as well as the problem that could come tomorrow. It is about being proactive. It's about being predictive. The challenges that exist today is that most solutions are reactive and don't cover all of the dimensions that actually go in making that work. And that is an important aspect to it. And that comes to testing and training. Back to you, Anil.
Yeah. So, like previously, we touched upon, how the how we are testing the backup, whether we're able to recover the data out of the backup that we have taken. So, this testing is very, very important. So, we always, we plan, every organization plans something called as a disaster recovery plan testing. So they have a proper disaster recovery plan. They test it. They see how the previous slide, what we talked about was data backup and recovery. It's just data, whether it's backing up properly, monitoring them, and whether it's being whether this particular data is being we are able to recover it or not. Here we are testing the entire application itself, right? So we're looking at when I'm able to recover the data, is the applications running properly? Are people able to access? Again, this is another thing. Another biggest, the most important thing is access. So whether that same kind of access has been retained, and the people are able to access this all the particular data that they were able to access. Similar, like how in the situation when there was before the disaster occurred, how they were able to seamlessly, they should be able to, the way it should be configured is that seamlessly they should be able to work from a disaster, when the disaster, before pre-disaster versus post-disaster. So that's very important. So what is this aspect of training? So what happens here is, when the training aspect here is, everybody should understand during we have there are we have in an organization, they have critical users, medium users, and less users. They call them as normal users. So these critical users, each one of them have the different kind of this thing in an organization, different kinds of functions in an organization. So how what we do is, we communicate to the communication plan here should include a training aspect where how the critical users are going to be. For example, let's say they are moving to a different location, right? So when they are moving to a different location, where exactly the critical users to be seated, where the normal users to be seated, and how these VPNs are going to be designed. So the whole thing, all these the way the users, basically this training is for the users. So when the users are not able to understand, in a disaster what to do, it'll be a very hectic thing for them. It'll create havoc for them. So it will be clearly, we have to train them to say that in case of disaster, these users will be seated here. They'll be working from this part, this location, this part of the organization. So that's clearly, a training aspect has to be there. How they are going to, I mean, and also as much as possible, it should be configured in such a way that seamlessly how they were in the normally how they were able to access, how they were able to log in, sign in. The same way they should be able to sign in even here also, even in case of a disaster also.
Quickly to add to Anil, the summary of that is having test scenario simulations where you are able to replicate and simulate real world disasters or disruptions, stress testing your organization. They're usually called tabletop exercises where key stakeholders participate in a controlled crisis simulation that can unveil vulnerabilities and update your runbook and your playbook. The goal is to have runbooks and playbooks that allow you to have a well-oiled machine so that should you have the scenario, you're able to go and do it. And if that is done properly, should you have an emergency, you're not going to run into a scenario where you're trying to figure things out at that point in time. That is actually the worst time to actually figure things out because you are already stressed and you have a bad situation. So you have to have conditions laid out ahead of time so that those runbooks are quickly implementable in a scenario where you're hyper stressed and you have a scenario where you have to get back on your feet relatively quickly. Moving on to incident response and planning. Back to you, Anil.
Yeah. So yes, again we spoke about training, right? So incident response planning is again when the users are working, they need help. They need help from the IT, right? So when they raise an incident, they should be able to get responses. So like how pre DR, how they were able to work. The same way, all the incident responses, how the IT people are providing the support to them, pre-disaster, even post-disaster, it should be the same. They should be able to continue to provide support. So there, and again, a proper incident response plan for DR also should be maintained. And yes, this will be a part of our disaster recovery policy and disaster recovery plan. The complete incident response plan will be also will be clearly articulated and followed during the DR.
So essentially what we're talking about is both the policy creation and actually planning for the activity. Case in point, if you're dealing with a 911 equivalent or a disaster of some sort, the ability is to have all processes in place so that everyone in the organization, those that are responsible, have a clear-cut, laid-out process to actually make that happen. Now, let's come to backup site selection. Anil.
Yeah. So this is another important aspect whenever you are selecting whenever you're selecting a backup site. So it could be hybrid, like we're talking. It could be an on-premise. So you might have an office. You might be having an office in Bangalore, and your DR site could be Delhi, or you might be having your office in Bangalore and your AWS or your cloud DR site could be Delhi, or it could be even Mumbai or whichever. So what happens here is there is something called as latency. So for that again has to be tested before we even set up before or rather when we are setting up a DR for the organization. This is something that we need to take care of, and we should consider this when we are setting up a DR. So what is the latency? Like let's say I am sitting in Bangalore and I'm able to the system is local to me and I'm able to access faster. Now in the DR, all my data is in Delhi, okay, which is sitting in another location. It could be an on-premise location, or it could be even on a cloud. So there you could find some latency. That it's not actually performing at the level that it was being performed when you are working on site. So you have to be very careful in choosing. Maybe instead of that, you choose Chennai, or probably you choose Mumbai or Pune or even Hyderabad, so that the latency is lesser. And the user does not get affected because of the space. And also there are some applications where also are very sensitive to the latency when it comes to committing the data. So that again it should be taken care of. Especially this is why selecting a backup site is very, very important for your DR.
So the locations, could be in the US, it could be East, it could be West. So if you're located in the East, having a backup site location in the West makes sense, or vice versa. As an example, even within Europe, you have the same things. The one thing that I basically say is that there are, of course, legal regulations today where data has to reside in a particular geography. Case in point, if you are part of Europe, you need to make sure that your data is actually located there. If you're part of the Greater China, Hong Kong, and those territories, again, there is data restrictions in terms of where the data can move. So your backup site location has to be within the considerations of making sure that we don't violate policies, especially regulatory policies that allow us to ensure that the site, does not, deviate from what the protocols are. So countries, there are lots of policies. You have CCPA in California, you have GDPR in Europe, and you have other evolving, policies that force the data locations to be chosen, according to that. Then, of course, let's move to quickly vendor selection and contracts. There's a lot of different technologies that actually get, into consideration. Putting a DR solution in place. Like I said, you have, what Anil said is, you have on-prem to cloud, you have cloud to cloud, you have on-prem to on-prem. So you have a lot of different combinations, including the hybrid cloud that you have to consider. Really looking at making sure that you have the right solution for your environment is an extremely key aspect. Any quick thing you want to add to it, Anil?
Yeah, so this vendor contracts is actually something very important. It has to align with all your DR, with your DR plan and with your DR policies. So that's a major thing, because most of them are they are an integral part of this DR. So vendor contracts aligning to your DR plan and all your DR policies is a must.
So moving on to data replication. So data replication in this particular aspect is an extremely important aspect of it. This actually ensures that you have multiple copies of your data. You're storing them in different locations for your backup purposes. You have fault tolerance. You also have the ability to access your network from different areas. This includes data mirroring, data replication of many of these areas. And there are a number of use cases that you have to do. You also have to make sure that you have a strong DLP process in place, which is essentially data loss protection, as you're looking at replication across different environments. Replication essentially is an incremental cost to the business because you have to maintain storage across multiple areas. However, it's only worth it provided the data is updated on a constant basis and you have a process in which you can replicate it at short notice. Again, this needs to be a standard protocol process that needs to be established at all points. Anil, want to add anything to it?
Yeah, so this is again, I will be talking about data backup and recovery. So this is again related to that. So you have critical systems. You cannot afford to, recover them from a backup. You need to have them, immediately running, like an active or an active passive. Probably like we are talking about the RPO and RTO. So this comes into picture. So when it's many of the applications, these are all I'm talking about critical applications where one fails automatically, it is moved to another location and you work seamlessly without knowing that it has changed, it has moved to a DR. So that's the major thing here when we talk about data application. That's the
yeah. And in data replication, you have basically three types. You have full table replication, you have key-based incremental replication, you also have log-based incremental replication. All of that requires different approaches overall, and each of them have their strengths and weaknesses that sort of come together. Next, moving on to communication strategy.
Yeah.
Anil, back.
So that's right. So communication is very, very important here. You see, right, we throughout, we looked at disaster recovery plan as well as a business continuity plan. So communication strategy is, very, very important. Like, how each one are going, how each of us are going to be accessing, how, there could be some restrictions, when it comes to you moving into a DR, when you move into a DR kind of environment. So there could be some things that you not be able to access. So those has to be communicated. clearly saying that you will not be able to in the DR, you'll not be able to access these modules. So you'll have to raise a ticket. So that could be because of maybe extra they want to take extra precautions about security, etc. So that's that kind of communication, and also uh, uh, how the entire thing has to be taken. The steps on what you need to do, during during a disaster, how you need to log in, what is the kind of what is the type of login that you, whether what's the type of there is any security or multi-factor authentication. So all those things. I mean, in an extra, maybe if you want to add, so if you have added an extra security aspect to for the DR. So all that has to be communicated very, very clearly. And this is a part of the communication plan for both BCP as well as for DR. So this will all be there in this as a communication plan in the both disaster, like DRP, as well as in the BCP also.
Thanks. Moving on to high availability. So high availability infrastructure planning is an extremely important component of this. Certain environments, again, high availability should be tied to the crown jewels of the most important, applications that you have. High availability essentially here means that you want to make sure that at any given point you're able to manage across reduced server load. You want to make sure that you have less data movement, in a way that can create an environment where your high availability infrastructure should not get compromised. You want better protection, and the more important thing with high availability is low latency. Making sure that you have copies in multiple locations means that you have localized data access, which can improve network performance, and that's a key thing. So the focus here is to ensure that you have better application performance, lower latency, you have better protection. All of that needs to be in place. When we talk about less data movement, we're really talking about having a distributed database so that it allows for different versions of the data to be closer to the transaction or data entry. And that's really an important aspect of high availability. Anil.
Yeah, so I would also move to the next one, disaster recovery automation, because HA, high availability infrastructure, and disaster recovery automation, they go hand in hand. So it's more like a hot site, both running on an active. So when I say that, there is a server here and I've replicated that server, I mean, there is going to be, online replication, right? So that's what it means. So these two run in parallel. So when I say high availability, I have created another set of components where when there is a disaster, automatically the other one takes over. From the primary, the secondary takes over, and seamlessly takes over, and there is and there is no loss of data, and there is no discontinuity in any process. So, these two always go together. You can call it, if you are going to have only a component, then we can say high availability. If you are going to entire infrastructure, the complete infrastructure is going to be available. We may still call it as a hot site. Even there, it could be a hybrid. Some of them can be, some of it can be on a high HA, active mode, and some of them can be also on an active passive mode, based on or depending on how critical the applications are, how critical these functions for your businesses are.
Moving on to cloud-based, methods. Anil, take that over.
Yeah. So this is the in thing today. So everybody is moving towards the cloud-based disaster recovery. So here, most of the on-premises, here also again we can have a hybrid. Many of them, they have some of the components still, like AD, Active Directory services, and some of their critical databases, they still want to have it in their on-premises. Okay, and also they would want to have so that is primary, and the secondary are the cloud. And some of the applications, the critical applications, they want to have it in the cloud. So there is a hybrid. There's a mixture of how people are working today. So this is the in thing. So we have AWS, we also have Azure and GCP. These are the major players in the market today, and and based on the criticalities and based on the availability zones and also costing is also important. So based on these three aspects, the customers today are deciding on which cloud to go and whether it's going to be a hybrid or a complete infrastructure, cloud-based disaster recovery is what cloud DR is what their people are looking at.
Moving on to the final two categories here, which includes the cybersecurity measures as well as continuous improvement. We work with enterprises of all sizes, small, medium, as well as very large enterprises. And the approaches that we have normally, designed are tailored to these environments. And those measures include, for example, managing not just the DR and the business continuity, but also the continuous improvement angle of it, because there is a one-time setup that needs to happen, but then there is a process in which you have to continuously upgrade and improve it. The goal is to ensure that we demystify this category. This is a category which, in my opinion, is based on working with many customers. Most customers have the biggest weakness here. We are as strong as our weakest link. And the weakest link typically in most companies is business continuity planning and disaster recovery, because enterprises are working on optimism, which means that you're optimistic that tomorrow is going to be better than today. However, bringing an angle of healthy paranoia or what I call definite pessimism, where you're essentially planning for a worst case scenario, is an important angle. It's just buying insurance. In other words, this is a equivalent of an insurance that we want to make sure that you have something in place. An insurance that actually can be deployed and be effective is an extremely important component. There's two pieces to this. One is to make sure that you have a one-time strategy in place, a one-time implementation, and then continuous improvement. With that, I'm just going to turn it over to Q&A.
Yeah, this time would like to open the floor for any questions. And if our production team can unmute the mics of the participants, that'd be great. All right, looks like we got one question here. How can enterprises strike a balance between adopting new technologies and maintaining cybersecurity resilience, considering the constantly evolving threat landscape?
That's a good one. It's a battle between the old, the now, and the new. The way I would look at it is that one way to effectively do this is to ensure that you're making tomorrow's decisions with knowledge of the tomorrows. In other words, very many organizations tend to make decisions for tomorrow based on yesterday's knowledge, and that sort of has to be inverted. The best news here, or the better news here, is technology continuously evolves in a way that it actually untraps value. In other words, technology today offers many choices that did not exist yesterday, where you had to, for example, an example of that is cloud-based disaster recovery was something that was not there before. In fact, it was much harder previously to implement some of these technologies. They either costed a lot of money or they ended up being very difficult to implement. But today you have choices that you can access. So the architecture in the environment has to be in a way that you can actually adapt to the new technologies. Case in point, let's say you adopt cloud as your strategy, or you go to a cloud-first strategy. The goal would be to ensure that you're leveraging the advantages that the cloud actually brings. And that's why I really, meant what I said is, if we are making tomorrow's decisions with yesterday's knowledge, the gap is going to be huge. However, if we say we're going to make tomorrow's decisions with today's infrastructure as well as today's knowledge that's closer to where things are actually headed, you'll be able to bridge the gap. And that's usually the fastest way to do this. The other is to be able to prioritize. For example, focusing on your crown jewels and making sure that you have a strategy for the most important applications, which sort of are your lifeblood. That will go a long way to make sure that you're able to bridge the gap. Hopefully I answered your question. If not, we can have a follow-on as well.
Thanks, Ragan. Here we got another good one here. Since we are discussing cybersecurity, is it important to address the new buzz surrounding ChatGPT? How secure is it to grant access to ChatGPT or OpenAI.com on a server where a company stores confidential information about its clients?
In short, ChatGPT, offers very many benefits and offers, a lot of challenges that sort of come together. So in a way, even how we have segmented the company, resilience focuses on maximizing good bots, as an example, and Pinochle focuses on minimizing the downside of irresponsible AI. So any new technology comes with benefits. It also comes with its challenges. From a security standpoint, ChatGPT is not an evolved technology. So giving it access to confidential information is a no-no at this particular point in time. Unless, however, ChatGPT is structured in a way that you can sort of quarantine it from leveraging the confidential information. In other words, the best metaphor I can probably come is that you're security cleared. If you look at government organizations, they have security cleared people. So there's various levels of security clearance that you have to secure. And then based on that, you have access to certain kinds of information based on the security clearance. In other words, ChatGPT is something that you have to give it security clearance, which means that it should be allowed to access a certain level of information and should not be allowed to access other kinds of information. This is something that we have done very, very successfully because we actually have our own ChatGPT, in our environment where it's created by us. We use it to create contextual information for security as well as for other information. But what we have done is be able to quarantine it to specific customers. So customer A cannot know about customer B and vice versa. And then still, within the context of the customer A or B respectively, you're able to analyze its own enterprise context vis-a-vis the external threat landscape. That's an example of a use case. So can it be done? The answer is yes. It has to be professionally done in a way that it has the right level of security clearances. That's really how I would approach it.
All right. And it looks like we have one more question here. How can enterprises assess their current cybersecurity posture and identify potential weaknesses or vulnerabilities that need to be addressed to rebuild or to build resilience?
This is one that I'll say we've sort of mastered. There's security from the outside and security from the inside. What we can, for example, do is generally enterprises outsource many of these things, just to be very clear, because there's a great degree of expertise that is required. So the kinds of things that the problems we solve, we want to make sure our solutions are very comprehensive. They're very competitively priced, and as well as we are in a position to decrease marginal cost for you as a client. We can achieve all the three, which is sort of the oxymoron or the paradox of the offering, is that it's highly comprehensive, it's highly competitive, and it keeps your marginal cost of actually embracing a state-of-the-art technology at a price that you would love. So the way I would say it is that you have an external security posture, which is looking at your security from the outside, that also includes third parties as well as any other risks which are your blind spots. That can be done very, very quickly, and we can actually look at your security posture from the outside. Almost rapidly, within say a week, we can probably give you all the vulnerabilities that you need to be aware of that the hacker typically sees. Then from the inside, we can also look at the vulnerabilities post-intrusion. God forbid, you have a scenario where you can see all the things that can possibly go wrong inside your environment, which can essentially give you the knowledge and the wisdom that requires you to take action. Most of the time, you're dealing with unknowns. It's almost analogous to an enterprise never having done a health checkup. All of us as individuals go to a doctor periodically, we get our health assessed, we take some actions. Most enterprises have not done that from a security standpoint. And it's very, very important that every organization actually goes through that health checkup. That's an area that we can quickly explore, help you demystify that, in a call that can be individually, specifically tailored to your requirement.
Thanks, Rangan. Or actually, looks like we have one more question, and I think we'll have to wrap it up after this. Nowadays, a large number of end users are working from home and accessing company data from unsecured internet connections. How can cybersecurity measures address such scenario? Can a regular vulnerability assessment and penetration testing help close these gaps?
Yes, for example, a great question. Continuous assessment is the model. Penetration testing that is done usually once a year, once in 6 months, is usually not sufficient. Today, the attack surface continuously evolves, which means that each time you change code, your environment changes. So it's very important to do continuous assessments, and continuous assessments includes all aspects. How you access your network. If you work from home, it is very important that you're working on a secure Wi-Fi. You're accessing your environment through a VPN. So all of these things have to be set up, and RDP as an example, remote desk protocol, all of these things have to be set up. So the infrastructure to work from a home is something that has to be looked in isolation as well as holistically across your enterprise, which means that anybody accessing your network has to be somebody that is qualified. It's very analogous to letting someone inside your house. You don't let any Tom, Dick, and Harry walk into your house. You ensure that you calibrate that and you allow the right kind of people. So very similarly, your network should have the ability to ensure that it knows a known user. It ensures that it only allows them. So that's from the network angle. But from the outbound angle, it is very important that the vulnerabilities that may exist with your home Wi-Fi or any other stuff is not suddenly transferred to the enterprise. So this has to be looked holistically. Penetration testing, yes, is an answer, but it is not the kind of stuff that happens once a year, which is a checkbox. It has to be continuous. So this is again an area that we specialize in. Happy to talk to you more, on a one-on-one basis to see how our solutions may be a fit for your environment.
And we actually have one more question, and after that, we'll have to wrap it up. But this is from Evan. What would you say is the best way to support bring your own device environment for mobile users?
Great question again. Mobile is an attack surface that is sort of, been largely the activities that enterprises have done have been largely underwhelming, which means that mobile can, essentially be a situation where someone can have a compromise in your network. Case in point, I lose my mobile phone. My mobile phone is accessible to the network either through applications or through apps or through email. So the ability for mobiles to be in your environment, the mobile device has to be approved. We want to make sure the latest vulnerability patches on the environment is essentially patched. The biggest problem when someone brings their own device is the ability for the enterprise to control that user, because that user is going to say, this is my device, I want my privacy. So generally speaking, your individual privacy as well as the enterprise security is sort of conflicting with each other. There are technologies that are available that will quarantine the enterprise applications into a zone which ensures that the individual privacy and the enterprise security can both sort of coexist. Again, that is something that we have internally implemented, and we implemented for our customers, where we sort of quarantine these two things that achieves the balance of bringing your own device, ensuring that privacy for the user is there, as well as the enterprise security is uncompromised. So there are ways and technologies that we can actually do this today, and it's important that it is done. If not, don't allow those users to be in your environment, because that is an attack surface which is open to being compromised.
All right. Thank you, Rangan. Thank you, Anil, and all of our panelists. And thank you all for joining today's webinar. For more information on upcoming webinars, security advisories, and newsletters, please do follow us on our LinkedIn, and we hope to see you all again soon.
Thank you very much for the participants. We look forward to talking to each of you as your needs in the space continue to evolve. Thank you so much for joining. Look forward to more. Thanks.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.